Hi everybody, Pastor Shane back again with another edition of Pastor Shane Explains, and today we're going to tackle the question of who should Christians vote for? Who should Christians vote for? Now, I've gotten this question usually from people who can't vote yet. I work in a high school setting, a lot of high schoolers, only a handful of which have reached the age that they actually have a vote. But this comes up for Christians all over the world. I'm going to speak specifically within, obviously, an American context. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, and so that's the context I know best. I'm going to speak to that, but I think the principles will carry over into most other countries and contexts as well. So, without further ado, who should Christians vote for? Usually this is in the context of a presidential election. I'm just going to use that context here. There are at least three things that I think a Christian should remember when they are considering whom to vote for. Number one, Jesus largely stayed out of formal politics. Jesus largely stayed out of formal politics. You know, Jesus is our example in so many ways. I mean, the ultimate intellect, the creator God, a sinless life. He had wisdom upon wisdom upon wisdom, these great wells of knowledge and mental strength and spiritual vigor. And yet with all of that, he stayed out of politics, almost completely. He never ran for office, didn't affiliate himself with any political party, and there were parties back in those days. He didn't even affiliate himself with a particular religious party, because amongst the Jews, politics and religion were very closely intertwined. Jesus stayed aloof. He stayed out of those things. In fact, someone could make the case that really Jesus made just a handful of statements that could even be remotely interpreted as political. One time he referred to King Herod as that fox. Wow. I guess that was his political platform. To me, this fact that Jesus stayed largely out of politics, wow, it just speaks volumes to me. It says to me as a Christian, not that I should not have anything to do with politics. No, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But it does say to me that I need to be careful. I need to be careful about immersing myself in the political process. You see, here was part of the genius of Jesus. Jesus did not get involved in formal politics, hardly at all, but he put in place principles, namely the gospel, that would transform the world. You see, the fact of the matter is that politics can't change the heart. Politics can only control from the outside. It doesn't matter who is in office, be they Republican or Democrat, male, female, what their particular religious persuasion is even. The fact of the matter is that political force can only control outward behavior. It cannot change the heart. The only one who can change a heart is Jesus. Christians these days, in my opinion, have gotten far too involved in formal politics. It's almost as though Christians across this country, at least the United States, have decided that the public proclamation of Jesus Christ, evangelism, public evangelism, is no longer viable. And because that is the case, Christians have more and more turned to politics, organizing themselves, endorsing certain candidates in their churches and creating entities that will support this candidate or the other. I just think we need to be so careful with that. Jesus' example was one that stayed largely outside of politics and instead focused on the proclamation of the gospel. I think we should do the same. So, first thing to remember when you're thinking about who to vote for as a Christian is that Jesus largely stayed out of politics. Now, number two thing you should remember is to vote. Do vote. I know there are some Christians, not very many, but some Christians who say, no, because Jesus stayed out of politics, generally speaking, we should not vote. Just stay out of it. Just mind our own business. I don't think that's true. You see, Jesus, it's true, stayed largely out of politics, but he, and of course, the gospel writers, the writers of the epistles later on in the New Testament, they concur strongly that we do have duties as citizens to participate in the process of life, of civic life in our context, in our country. And so I think it's very clear, Christians should vote. The Bible says honor the king. Well, we don't have kings, but we do have senators and congressmen and presidents, and part of honoring them and the process they represent is by participating in it. We also have an obligation to help take care of the poor. Well, in our context, at least here in the States, part of the taking care of the poor process is done through government. This and many more reasons. We do need to vote. So take your vote if you've got one and use it. Put it to use. Principle number 3, when you're thinking about who to vote for, remember, vote for Jesus. Vote for Jesus. And here's what I mean by that. When I say vote for Jesus, I mean vote for the things that are biblical principle based. Now, sometimes that's very difficult to discern. I mean, one party, the other, the fringe parties, whatever. It can be difficult to tell. How would Jesus vote on this particular issue, on this particular instance? Add to that we're all human beings. No candidate for office is perfect. They've got pluses and minuses. It takes a lot of prayer and a lot of thought to think, behind whom should I put the power of my vote? I'm going to add one thing to this third thing to remember. When you vote for Jesus, one thing very important to remember, so important to remember, never forget it. Whenever you're voting on an issue or for a political candidate, always remember, voting for Jesus means that we vote for religious liberty. You say, what does that mean? Well, if you're going to vote for religious liberty, it means that you are going to vote that the separation of church and state is solidly maintained. I can think back over my years of voting for presidential candidates, and I can think of sometimes that there was a candidate that had some really good qualifications to them, but they were on the edge of breaking down this wall that separates church and state, at least in this country. Part of the genius of the United States of America is that we do not have institutionalized religion. Let me pick a Democrat and a Republican. Obama and George Bush Jr. They represent, one's Republican, one's Democrat. Neither one of them ran as the Catholic candidate or the Presbyterian candidate or the Buddhist candidate, for that matter, or even as the atheist candidate. Because in this country, we have separated religion from the state. That's awesome. May it never change. Because as soon as the state decides that they are going to make decisions about religion and force people to comply, be it in big or small ways, history tells us the result sooner or later is disaster. Let's keep church and state separate. And if there's a candidate, to me, whatever the issues are, the other issues they may be that I agree with them on, if they want to bring the government into religion or religion formally into the government, you don't have my vote. Plain and simple. Because everything else follows. As long as religious liberty in this country is maintained, then we have the freedom to proclaim the gospel. That's very important. So when you're thinking about who to vote for, remember, Jesus largely stayed out of politics, formal politics. Secondly, do vote. You've got to vote. I think the Bible gives us very clear principles. We need to use that vote for His glory. And thirdly, remember to vote as Jesus would, particularly with regard to religious liberty. Those are my thoughts on voting, who you should vote for. Hope that's helpful to you. We'll see you next time on Pastor Shane Explains.